Welcome everyone to our panel, Minerals and Materials Security for the Future of Defence. And I think this topic really is at the heart of SAFE's mission. As you just heard, my name's Oliver Wright. I'm a partner at DLA Piper, and it's my pleasure to be moderating the session today. Our national security and defence industrial bases rely heavily on supplies of critical materials, and there's an inherent risk because some of these materials are not produced here in the US or even in allied nations, and others, such as aluminum, have seen significant declines in domestic production in recent years. And so this panel brings together key players from various sectors, and we're fortunate to have with us, as you just heard, Jeff, Brian, Nazak, and Charles. I think this group really are the people that Robbie mentioned in his opening remarks last night. These are the people who really are making a difference and can make a difference in this sector. They're really at the coalface of this issue. And so during our prep sessions, I promised the panelists that we would have people in the audience who are really, really keen to hear from them and to hear solutions from them to address the supply chain issues that are so important to our defence. So I hope you can expect to hear some solutions to the problems that are in front of us. So let me kick things off with a question to Brian. And Brian, maybe you represent one of the leading defence contractors here in the US. What do you see as sort of the specific minerals that present the highest risk to the defence sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first, I want to thank SAFE for another great event this year. Really been learning a lot. So Lockheed Martin, right, we do 21st century security applications and systems. The thing with defense contractors, right, we are very much high mix, low volume. So we make aircraft, radars, satellites, missiles, a variety of defense systems. But our volume is very, very small. So we're making jet fighters, make about 12 aircraft a month. Missile systems, you can make dozens to 100 a month. So everything we're doing is more bespoke and lower volume. And the way to think about materials in the defense market, it's the same materials that are in the commercial sector, but it's the scale is much more smaller, right? So think about electric vehicles, and Robbie had some good examples this morning. Electric vehicle factory, 30,000 vehicles a month. Cell phones, I was trying to grasp this number last night. I think the large cell phone companies are doing 500,000 phones plus a day, right? So the scale on those sectors is, it's tough for me to grasp that, right, when we're talking about these small bespoke supply chains. But, it's from rare earth magnets, it's the battery materials, it's the semiconductor materials, it's the same thing you see in the commercial sale, but it's just, again, the scale is so much smaller. So when you think about critical materials, though, in defense, you also have to think about where we are in the supply chain, right? It's a long way from production of a system down to the mining level. So let's just use titanium as an example, critical material going back to the beginning of the jet age. We have very, very complex titanium alloy contracts. And those contracts focus on grades, forms, shapes, sizes of material. We can have 100 different product lines on a master titanium alloy contract. And the contract itself, very complex contract to negotiate. So the machine shops we work with are buying off of those contracts. They're working with forging companies and the titanium alloy melt shops. Those companies themselves, right, they're buying pure titanium sponge, right? And those sponge companies are buying, are using the Kroll process to convert mineral sands, titanium oxide to metal, right? So from Lockheed's perspective, we're 4 tiers removed from the titanium example. And you can think about that for all these critical materials, right? You have to understand that whole vertical supply chain to understand where we are in this. And it makes it a complex issue, right, to work with the mineral sector. So from our perspective, though, at the end of the day, what we're looking at with the defense sector, the ideal solution would be robust commercial production of minerals that serves both the commercial sector and the defense sector. in these markets.
And maybe this is a question to you, but to anyone else who wants to address it. Other than the scale, which is clearly one of the challenges for making sure that you alone can solve the problem, what do you see as some of the other major challenges that the materials that you're interested in face, whether it's commodity pricing and dominance from China in terms of the impact that can have on pricing, or are there other major systemic things in the market that make this particularly challenging?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of complex variables going on there. One thing that's always challenging even with the more bespoke materials is just understanding who's actually doing it correctly, right? Who has a resilient supply chain? Where's the transparency in the market, right? How do you actually go and find somebody who's doing it, who has a completely resilient, well-defined supply chain?
And maybe then this might be a good segue to ask Charles a question about, I think the trading companies can play an important role in this sort of transparency or in knowing the information that perhaps the defense contractors are looking for. So Charles, you represent a trading company. How is this sector, this is a very quickly evolving sector which presumably presents opportunities for traders. How are you seeing opportunities and challenges in this sector? But then also, how do you think that trading companies can be part of the solution for government and for the defense sector?
No, it's a very good question. Thanks, Oliver. I think trading houses, there's a couple of things that we always do and we always do well. Number one is we do very, very detailed research into whole of supply chain. We're agnostic to the point in the supply chain where Brian's right at one end of it. We've got miners at the other end. A trader looks at the entire supply chain in detail. And I think sometimes we can help a government or government departments really focus on the bits that matter so that a policy, a tariff policy, for instance, can be quite specific and quite focused. I think that's number one. Number two, we are supply chain, and there was another colleague from a competitor here gave me the phrase earlier, a shock absorber in the supply chain. So, all that a customer like Brian cares about is getting his product delivered on time and on spec, or indeed his subcontractor who's supplying him with his finished good. We can take that risk, but we need to be incentivized to do that. Because if it's simply commercial, if we simply rely on the market and the market price, we won't do that for many of the supply chains that this country needs. Because the market doesn't work. It doesn't always work here. We are uncompetitive in comparison to China. We have higher labor costs if we're doing it here in this country. The opportunity cost of energy is uneconomic. We have much higher environmental costs here and regulatory barriers. So in order to incentivize companies like ours as a trading house or indeed miners, we need to be assisted if there's particular supply chains that we want to keep valid and keep strong for this country.
And can you give some specific examples of what that assistance ought to be?
Yeah, I think so for instance, the one that exists right now, the Inflation Reduction Act and the tax credit system, it works. 45X for us works. We must keep it. Let's not lose that. That's something that works already. Not allow that to become a victim of some sort of partisan tit for tat. I think tariffs can work. 232 tariffs previously in Trump 1.0 worked, particularly if it was applied to the feedstocks as well. So, and we're big in the aluminum supply chain here. That needs to apply to alumina as well, aluminum oxide, which is really important because otherwise we can't compete. Our energy costs are higher, our labor costs are higher, etc. So, and then I think the third thing that a trading house can do is invest in assets. And one of the things that we did as a trading house was spot a single point of failure. The US today has only one remaining alumina refinery. Used to be 4, there's now 1. Prior to that, there were 7. There were 20 aluminum smelters, there are now 5, with plans for another. But there's only 1 alumina refinery. And that bauxite all has to be imported. So assistance from departments or agencies to keep some of that tied infrastructure and make it sustainable, that will be 20% of the cost of building a new one. And we may need to build some new ones as well.
Mm-hmm. Nazak, I think Charles just told us some things that the government has got right and that we need to do more of. You've been involved in government in a number of different positions. What do you see that has not gone well and that has been done wrong and perhaps led us to the situation we're in today, which is that we're trying to play catch up? And what changes do you see are likely to be on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a great point. And the government has stated that in terms of sort of critical minerals, I also want to introduce strategic materials into the mix, because there's things like those industrial diamonds that go into every cutting tool on the planet virtually that all manufacturing essentially relies on, and 100%, let me reiterate that, 100% of that supply chain is in China. And this is, unlike critical minerals, there's areas where we have the know-how to make it in the United States, but we've got an enormous lead time issue just to kind of create the capacity needed for the defense sector. And we have, and this kind of goes to your question, so these are things that the government knows about. We have a stockpile program that's essentially not functioning. We have areas that the government is aware of that need to be bolstered, and we don't have whole of government strategies overused. I'm going to say that, but then I'm going to define it. We don't have a comprehensive US government strategy that really looks at building capacity and sustaining it, right? And that's where the government has gone wrong. And frankly, look, just to be clear, and I'm going to say some things that maybe won't be popular, but since globalism has just sort of had taken over, the government lost the ability to do things. Right? The government lost the ability to strategize. So it's part of our own learning ability in industries. How do I process? How do I do this? But the government has to learn how to do this better, right? I will say, as partially as a trade remedy, anti-dumping, countervailing duty, sort of tariff imposition attorney, you guys, we have 200 years of over tens of thousands of cases where we impose tariffs on predatorily priced goods, dumped or other economic distortions, and we've been able to either rehabilitate a domestic industry or create the growth of an industry whose growth had been materially retarded by predatory import competition. So these things work if they're calibrated correctly. We've got, when we're talking about at least critical minerals, we've got an issue of access to mines abroad as China's kind of going and gobbling them up. We've got sort of now deep sea nodules mining that are available to us. We've got to mobilize there, which includes permitting, which includes funding. Folks talk a lot about offtake agreements, but Buy American requirements is going to be an important tool. We can incidentally include allies in some of these sort of Buy American plus statutory provisions or government regulations. Continue, as you just mentioned, investment incentives, offtakes agreements, and you had talked about demand earlier, and demand needs to be created. That means companies and the purchasers of critical minerals or strategic materials have to make the decision to buy from ex-China processors, the ex-China supply chain. And if they don't do it, the government should very much impose import restrictions that prevent the predatory investments from kind of cutting our legs out from under us. We cannot, I'm also an economist, is an economic matter, we cannot just provide domestic incentives and call that a day, because the predatory imports, mainly from China, predominantly from China, are going to displace all the value of the investments we make here. So we've got to build, we've got to sell, and we've got to protect.
And Brian, just on one of those points about the government really needing to force the market to purchase ex-China materials, do you as defense contractors are you already subject to those sort of requirements in order to sort of contract with the government? But is that enough, or what else is needed in terms of the push for consumers to take the right decisions?
Yeah, so first, I appreciate your point on the stockpile program. I will just say out there, I do think that if you look at the history of strategic and critical materials and where the country has been in the past with that massive stockpile that just protects the broad industry, and where we are today with a very focused and diminished stockpile, we need to go back to that previous model. I think that's been advocated by multiple administrations, and I think it's finally time that we actually see that happen. But to your point, right, we do actually have several different defense sourcing regulations in place. And in general, the defense industry is relatively strong at sourcing material from more resilient sources, inherent with the systems that we make, but also driven by this regulatory environment. So things like nickel alloys, cobalt alloys, titanium alloys, all have to be melted in the US, and that requirement's been on the books for years and years. More recently, we have restrictions on where we can source processed tantalum metal and alloys, tungsten powder and metal, samarium cobalt magnets, neodymium iron boron rare earth magnets. So that is driving change in the defense sector, right? And there are producers of those materials outside of China. Well, one thing I will kind of caution about the defense sector, sourcing restrictions, is what you can see in some of these markets, and I'll pick on Samco magnets. You see the defense sector being pretty strong in buying those materials from resilient sources. You see those facilities kind of being sized to match the defense demand. You're not necessarily seeing the commercial demand piggybacking off of that. Maybe the price point isn't viable for the commercial aspect as it is for the commercial sector. So I do think that those are effective in some regards to driving defense demand there, but again, maybe not resolving the broader economic issues where I think a lot of the challenges are for the economy. With that being said, though, too, those defense sourcing regulations, they're not incentives, right? They're regulations. You know, it's a requirement. It's a pass-fail. You have to have that material to be able to deliver your system. It would be nicer to see some more incentives, right, to encourage broader sourcing of materials that aren't just, you know, you're going to get a penalty if you're non-compliant.
Can I also add something? I mean, really, this has to come from leadership at the top. We all saw in 2018 what happened when President Trump got really into steel and aluminum, right? We had these sort of unprecedented tariffs. I worked on them from the Commerce Department side. But somehow, on the critical mineral space, you drop an EO, and then everybody goes back about doing their businesses, and then things just linger, right? Like, really, there's a lot of good people in the government who have ideas and who need to be emboldened to take their ideas to the top, but this needs to be a top-down. The president has to care about this thing. The cabinet members have to care about this thing enough to get it done and think about it every day. And until that happens, China holds all the cards, and China can bring theoretically, right, our economy to a screeching halt just through export bans in a way that we can't do to China.
I'll turn to Jeff. Jeff, as one of the sort of North American critical minerals supply, one of the sort of key players in this space, where do you see sort of opportunity, maybe it's low-hanging fruit, for us to be able to quickly bolster supply chains in which commodities, and what do you need to make that happen?
Well, I think I'll bifurcate your question. Maybe talk first about mining, and then I'll move to mineral processing, because the challenges in each space are a little bit different. In the mining side of the business, in a single word, the core challenge is time. And what I mean by that is it takes an enormous amount of time, not just in the United States, but generally in Western countries broadly, to permit new production. You know, we heard this morning that it takes up to 29 years, I think was the number given, to permit a new mine. I mean, this is a little bit cliche, but surely if we can put a man on the moon in less than a decade, it shouldn't be taking 3 decades to permit a single new mine. And you know, the opportunity in this space is this is something that's entirely within our control. And it actually doesn't cost any money. It saves money. Like we actually control permitting, we being the public and government, more broadly speaking. And for the mining industry, the industry doesn't need lower standards. Like we operate today at the standards. We just need tighter timelines. And what those tighter timelines will do is it will unlock a significant amount of investment, create greater certainty for that investment, and it also helps our domestic processing industry. One of the challenges that the processing industry faces is that there's a dwindling supply of mine supply in North America, which of course makes the logistical costs of moving concentrates to these processing facilities higher and further challenges their economic competitiveness. So maybe just to switch more firmly to processing now, the challenge in this space is really the economics and the competitiveness of these facilities. The processing industry in North America has been under tremendous pressure for a number of years now, and as a result, we've seen these facilities close and struggle to remain economic. And that's largely due to the amount of capacity that's been brought on in China that both is newer and oversupplying many of these markets, making our existing facilities less and less competitive. So from my perspective, it does require a public policy solution if you want to expand mineral processing capacity. I think there are solutions out there, as I alluded to in my remarks. Like a lot of these facilities, like they exist, they're permitted, they have the skills and expertise. For relatively low capital, you can expand these facilities. But then as you expand them and increase production, if you're increasing production into a market that's already balanced, you're gonna oversupply that market, lower prices, and further erode your own economics. And obviously that's not gonna work. So you do need some sort of a stockpiling or offtake arrangement to deal with that increased production if you're going to develop secure supply chains.
And so I think the sort of price floor is really what we're talking about, right? In order to underpin the project so that you've got certainty of the economics after that production comes online.
I think a price floor is one tool. I also think a price floor is a very costly tool, potentially. Stockpiling proposals, there's a lot of different models you could explore here. My own view is I think stockpiling has more merit than a price floor, in part because then the government is acquiring a physical asset, and the cost to taxpayers of such a program is materially lower than a price floor scenario.
And I would probably also say that the price floor isn't as flexible as just using tariff tools to level the playing field, right? Those can be adjusted over time as the dynamics of the industry change. And if you are really going to make this industry healthy, you've got to sort of use all of these tools, stockpile everything. But you also have to have a dynamic model that can flex in a way that price floors can. And if you're going to do it in a statute or something, could you imagine how long it'll take to get Congress to legislate something else?
Brian, one other challenge we talked about as new products come online and as defense contractors consider those new sources of supply is ensuring that they have been qualified and that you can use them. What are the timelines and what are the challenges you face there, and what do you need from government to help kind of close that gap?
Yeah, that's a great question and a nuance I don't think a lot of folks pick up, right? So there's a difference between a commodity and engineered product, right? A commodity, is generally produced to a specification, and usually it's kind of a pass-fail, right? When you go to a value-added processing facility, whether you can, switch suppliers at the commodity level. When you get down to the mid-tier of some of these material supply chains, you're talking about things like rare earth magnets or specific tungsten alloys used in munitions, then it becomes more of an engineered product. And if you're not familiar with the rare earth magnet sector, I mean, there's literally hundreds of different grades of rare earth magnets. And there's inconsistencies, right, in products going from one supplier to the next. So you have a lot of opportunity right now because you have a lot of emerging mid-tier processors coming online. Started with the first Trump administration, continued with the past administration, and these things are starting to get to maturity. We have a challenge now, right, where we have, defense industries, very happy with our European and Japanese magnet producers. There's a lot of interest in things like the new magnets. Well, if your program, your missile, your aircraft, your government customer is happy with the supply chain, right, there's not going to be any engineering work funded, right, to look at the new magnet compositions. And if you're already on cost and schedule, right, they don't see that risk necessarily. So what we believe there needs to be, right, is some level of kind of partnership between the government and industry to pair parts of the vertical supply chain to start testing these materials, these engineering materials, and even some of the commodity level materials, and start getting those things into programs of record, right? Program record means essentially for us an aircraft or a major system, and start to integrate the emerging suppliers. It's just a barrier of entry, right? Because if you change an engineered material in an aerospace system, you need to know how the overall system is going to be impacted, right? Is it still flight worthy? Is it still going to perform in the same way that was originally designed? And there can be significant cost to change an engineered product. I mean, if you're talking about changing a structural or critical material within something like a solid rocket motor or flight control actuation system, I mean, testing of a missile system, if you have to flight test it, I mean, you're talking a 7-figure bill per test. So it's significant, and I don't think a lot of folks understand that aspect of the aerospace and defense. And I think we need to start to see a little bit more of that from the government as these things come to maturity.
And maybe just to stress something to sort of double down on what Brian was saying was the value of innovation, right? We have to keep continuing to press for reduced rare earth magnets or rare earth free magnets, right? We've got to be thinking constantly about these are essentially, at the end of the day, critical minerals or scarce resources, and what are the different kinds of battery chemistries or other formulations we can use that are able to better leverage more abundant resources. So I just wanted to sort of double click sort of the innovation aspect of this argument, because innovation takes us past the constraints of today into the possibilities of tomorrow.
And do you think, where do we need a bigger push in innovation? Should we expect Lockheed Martin to be innovating? Should we expect government to be funding research institutes? Where do you think where are we not doing enough at the moment?
I think companies are always looking, including Lockheed Martin, to innovate. And I think that the dynamics there, I think the U.S. is just inherently an innovative market. And I think the U.S. government and the national labs, one place where I'd like to see more of this happen is the partnerships between the national labs and private industries, because the labs do amazing things, companies do amazing things. If they're brought together more, I think that the potential is just completely mind-blowing. Universities are doing incredible things, but also, I'm going to put my export control hat on, we got to stop transferring all the technology from our innovations to our foreign adversaries if we really plan to stay ahead.
There's I can give you some specific examples for innovation, and I'm struck by Brian's comment because he represents one end of the supply chain, and we're absolutely upstream at the other end. And I think one of the things government can do, or government agencies can do, is connect us better. So, for instance, either us can produce gallium. He doesn't want gallium, he wants a semiconductor. But actually connecting us all together so that we create domestic supply chains is one of the roles. In terms of innovation, I'll give you a good example in terms of the rare earth. The core products, the core minerals required. There's plenty of it here in the US, but how do we refine it is the bit that's missing. Commercial refining, not just in a lab in a university, but then that leap across into it becoming commercial. And I know, for instance, we have 35 million tons of red mud tailings, and there's quite a lot of red mud tailings here in the US, some of which has got a lot of rare earth in it. But nobody's cracked how to commercially refine that yet in a way that's acceptable to the EPA here in the US. That's the sort of expensive, needs to be state-sponsored innovation that needs to happen. Because none of us will want to do that commercially. It's too difficult, it's too much of an experiment.
And beyond a discussion like today, are there forums, you think, currently where the sort of expertise of everyone in the value chain is being brought together with the government to try and crack this? Or do you think we need to create, or we need a more collaborative approach, and is it the government that should be leading that?
I mean, I'll say, just as a former political official in government, we really just need a moonshot. I know that phrase is overused, but like really, this is, I can't think of a sector that is more critical to the foundational of everything we do than critical minerals and strategic materials. And unless it comes from the top, moonshot, with clear articulation of where we are now today and where we need to go by year X, and constant focus and attention and resources poured into that, we're just not going to get there, right? Just writing an executive order and putting it out there, and we have lots of experience of years and years, those things die on the vines. We need continued sustained effort by political leadership, including Congress, including businesses. Everybody's got to be rowing in the same direction. And again, the vision starts at the top.
I think that sounds fantastic. And we'll use the last few minutes maybe just to give everyone an opportunity, or everyone else to give an opportunity to say what they think they need from the government, on the assumption that I was right and there are people in the audience who are listening and are going to take this away. Jeff, why don't we start with you? What's the one thing you could use to really make a difference in this sector?
Well, maybe I'll just riff off of your comments a little bit, because I do think it requires political leadership. Like, we need a step change in where we are today to where we want to be. You know, I've drilled on this issue around time and permitting extensively. It is a huge issue in our sector. It does require political leadership to resolve. But I think at the same time, like, it's not just politicians. Like, there is a role for industry here to provide or help provide the political cover to support the changes that are required. And that does require, I think, a supply chain wide approach. So there is opportunities for us to do a better job working together to highlight like not only what a challenge this is, but the opportunity that could be created if you can go from 20 and 25-year permitting timelines down to even 5. Like, that would be an enormous value unlock. And again, it's entirely in our control.
Charles?
Yeah, the industrial mineral chain that this country has and has had has been fantastic, but it's very old and it's very tired. So use multiple tools now. Number one, and I'll back up Jeff in terms of time. We need to be able to give those companies that own those assets grants and loans now, not DOE loans that take 18 months to get through the myriad of discussions. We need stuff that can happen inside 3 months. Stop thinking like a huge bank and start thinking like aggressive private equity. Bring that different culture. So that for sure, keep the Inflation Reduction Act and the tax credits in the areas where it matters. And targeted tariffs do make a difference.
And Brian, from the defense contractor's perspective, what's the one takeaway, and what would make a big difference for you?
There actually has been a lot of progress on certain decoupling and certain critical materials in the last 6, 7, 8 years. One thing that I think could help some of the more bespoke markets, particularly like the rare earth magnet market, is if we start to kind of whitelist who we should actually be going towards sourcing. So whitelisting between government and industry, you know, who is essentially compliant with the requirements that we have today. We're going in 2027, we're going to this full decoupling, non-China, non-Russia, non-Iranian, non-Korean, North Korean, down to the mining level. So I think we kind of need to understand from a supply chain perspective, right, just kind of narrow in on who's going to meet that requirements, and then we can direct these complex sub-tiers with dozens and dozens of motor manufacturers and other things, start to direct them towards these secure supplies. So I think that putting together that kind of white list is a partnership between industry and government that we can work on.
Brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for the time today, and thank SAFE for organizing this really important discussion. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.